As women, we're constantly told everything about how we should be, how we should look, how we should act, what we're supposed to do, quote unquote. And, I think a lot of the times we maybe put ourselves on the back burner and our dreams and our wants. And I think that we're just so much more capable than we think we are.
Welcome back to the show. Hope you're all having a wonderful week so far. So today's guest, I love talking with her. This was such a great conversation. I talked with Kacie Rose Burns. She is the creator of a very popular account on Instagram and on TikTok and on all the socials. And Kacie is a professional dancer by trade and had always dreamed of living in Italy and really just felt pulled there her whole life, but she didn't want to travel alone. So after years of waiting, she actually just decided that she was going to travel alone. And not only did she fall in love with Italy, with the country, but she also fell in love with a guy. And they started a long distance relationship. Then COVID happened. And as a professional dancer, there just wasn't a whole lot of activity going on in New York City during COVID for professional dancers. So she made the decision to take a leap of faith and ended up moving to Italy with her boyfriend. And now what she does is she provides on her social media channels, she provides travel tips and interesting tidbits she's learned as an American living abroad, and also talks about culture shocks. And I can't tell you how interesting her content is. So I hope you get a chance to check it out. And today what we talk about on the show is Kacie's experience, how she made that jump from being a professional dancer to now operating a very successful account. She also has a part of her business, which is doing tours, and she talks about that. So if you have a hankering for maybe going on a tour to Italy, we talk a little bit about that experience and what that is like for Kacie to lead those tours. And we also talk a lot about which social platforms work well for her. Where does she make her money? How does she really think about the social platforms to support what she does? And we talk a whole lot about mindset and what does it mean when people say negative things to her or respond negatively to some of the content, and how does she handle that? And I just loved Kacie's approach and how she thinks about being a creator and an influencer and the responsibility that goes along with it. I can't wait for you to hear this, so we're going to jump right into it. Here we go. Kacie, welcome to the show.
So nice to see you. How are you?
I'm great. And as I was just saying to you but right before we got started, I watch your content and all I want to do is find some place to get that type of delicious food that you tend to show. So you live in Italy.
Yeah.
How long have you been there? How did it come about that you live there?
Yeah, so I have been living here for just about 3 years now. I moved in January 2021. And my boyfriend is from Florence. And so we had a very kind of butterfly effect meeting, if you will. So I was a dancer in New York. I decided in 2018 to do a solo trip to Italy because I was feeling a little stuck and needed to go do a solo trip to Italy.
Yeah.
I did Venice, Florence, and Rome. I met him my first day in Florence. We ended up doing long distance. Yeah, I know. We did long distance for a year. Yeah. And then he came to live with me in New York for a year. That was in December 2019. The pandemic hit about 3 months later, but luckily he was able to stay in New York. And then at the end of 2020, his visa was up. My industry, being a dancer, was completely non-existent. And I figured, we talked about it and decided to make the move to Italy for a 6-month trial basis. And here we are 3 years later, never left.
So when did you start your account in terms of, you've built such an amazing following. When did you start kind of creating content on a regular basis to share with other people?
I fell into it by accident. I fell into content creation by accident. I made a video. Before all of this, I used Instagram and TikTok for videos of cats and cooking, truly did not use social media. And we were actually on the plane moving to Italy. And I made a compilation video. There was a trending song at the time. And I was like, oh, that's cute. So I put a bunch of clips about me and Dario's relationship together, purely to show him, showed him, and then, uploaded it to TikTok, shut my phone down for 17 hours. And when I opened it back up, the video had gone viral. And at that point, there was a 2-week mandatory quarantine in Italy. And so I was like, what else am I going to do but create some content? I'm learning all this new stuff. Like, might as well share it with the world. And yeah, and then it just continued to grow into something bigger than I ever could have imagined. And here we are.
Well, I know what your content is. Can you share with the audience, like, what type of content do you create?
Yeah, I create travel content about, how-tos, things to know before you come to Italy and traveling around the world in general. And then I also just share my life and what my life is like in Italy, living abroad as an American.
Yeah. So in a lot of your videos, you will be heard speaking Italian. I don't speak Italian, but you sound completely fluent to me. Did you like get there and it was like ground zero? You had to like learn.
Yeah, I wish I had learned more Italian before I come. If I could go back and change one thing, that's probably what it would be. But no, I didn't know any Italian. When we made the decision to move to Italy, I started kind of repeating after Dario everything that he would say. He'd be on the phone with his friends or his family, and I kind of repeat after him like a little 3-year-old. So I was doing that for a while until one day I accidentally repeated a very bad curse word. They're called bestemmie in Italian, and I had no idea. And I was pretty scared to mimic after that. So I ended up when I first came over here, I was on a study visa and I was studying Italian at an Italian academy. So I kind of was ground zero and jumped right in, and yeah. And then after that, learning by, hearing it and being involved in it. Yeah.
I mean, I love that. So you mentioned before that you made this video or you posted this video right before your plane took off. Yeah. It went viral. I have seen your content. I've seen that you've had other content go viral. Is there a formula or is there some insight about making content go viral that you've had now that you've built a great audience, you've had some stuff go viral several times? Yeah. First of all, what does it mean to go viral? Maybe you can share that. And then secondly, do you have like a way that you go, okay, if I do this, this will likely go viral?
I wish I did, but even there's some things that I create sometimes that go viral that I was not expecting to go viral. And it's funny because it's always the videos that you spend the least amount of time on that go the most viral. And then the ones that I spend like hours on, like I would spend hours creating this video and it doesn't really do well, quote unquote, but like, so I wish I had a formula, but you really kind of at the mercy of the algorithm. And I think the most important part, when you start creating content is to not aim to have something go viral, but to rather aim to have it be informative and helpful to your audience, be funny, maybe, impacting them in some sort of way. I think that's the thing that you have to focus on. And then if it goes viral, great. But if it doesn't, you still feel good about the content that you put out, right? But yeah, I wish I had a formula that would be a lot easier on my end, but no.
Yeah. So, and from your perspective, what does it mean when something goes viral?
I honestly don't really know. I kind of, I guess in the literal sense, it means if it gets over a certain amount of views, like if it gets 1 million views, it's clearly gone viral, right?
Right.
For me though, again, like I kind of had to change my mindset pretty early on in content creating to not like try to get viral and like to not worry about it if it isn't viral, you know? And once I changed that kind of changed the game. So I don't really focus on going viral anymore, honestly, which I think is a lot more healthy mentally if anybody's trying to be a content creator,
Yeah. Well, and so I want to ask too, because there is a misconception and we work with creators and influencers all the time. We know how much work goes into doing it. If you're going to have longevity with what you're doing, if you're going to really build and nurture your audience, it requires a lot of work and energy.
A surprising amount. Yeah.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about like how a week works for you.
Totally. Yeah. It's bizarre when work is your life and life is your work, right? Because you kind of struggle, and I still struggle with it sometimes, kind of shutting off your brain and not seeing everything as work. Because even when I scroll, I'm gaining ideas of like, oh, that trend is cool, or that video is cool, or I like that idea, or maybe I could do this. Like your brain is constantly going, and then it kind of travels with you, no pun intended, but so that everything you do in the day, you're like, oh, maybe this is a content idea. And like, listen, I have worked every single odd job, you name it. I have worked the job in New York to try to make it, I was a dancer. Content creating is the hardest job I've ever had. It is deceivingly hard because you become, you're the concept creator, but you're also the editor, you're the music designer, you're the lighting designer, your makeup, your hair, your costume design, your everything. It's so much. And that's just to create one piece of content.
Right.
You go into editing, which editing videos takes me probably a couple hours, I would say. And then yeah, you want to spend time engaging with your audience, because the whole reason why you're, making content is for them, right? And so you want to spend time responding to messages and responding to comments, and it's a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
So I was the first person to be like, what do influencers even do? And then I'm on the other side of the coin now, and I'm like, this is freaking hard.
And how many pieces of content are you pushing out on a weekly basis? So you said it could take you hours to edit one video. How many videos are you doing on a week?
Yeah, well, I used to do 2 a day is what I did on TikTok. And then once you start, this is another thing, once you start expanding into other forms of social media, right? So I started on TikTok, then I went over slowly to Instagram, then I started YouTube, then I eventually started my own business, which is a whole other plethora that is all tied together, right? So when you create a piece of content, those pieces of content have to go on several different mediums. And the interesting part also about going viral is that something might not work on TikTok, and then you post the same thing on Instagram and it'll go viral. Or, oh, something will go viral on TikTok and I post it to YouTube Shorts and it gets nothing. Like, it's very interesting, honestly. It's kind of a guessing game.
Yeah.
It's just me behind it. It's just me. I'm the one that does it. And it's a lot of maneuvering and a lot of thinking about different little details when you're putting it on different platforms. A lot of little tedious work. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were doing 2 per day, which my God, that's a lot. And now you're doing
I'm like, girl, I don't know how she did it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, even 1 per day, if it could take hours to edit, just to edit one video, I mean, that's a lot. And when you say per day, are you talking about Saturdays and Sundays as well, like weekends too? Okay. So this is 7 days a week. Just so for everyone listening, creator influencer job, at the very least, it's a full-time job.
And I say all that, and it's the best job I've ever had. Like it's the thing that I'm the most grateful for, right? Yeah. But it's one of those things that I had no idea. I was completely clueless going into it. So I'm glad I know it now, and I wouldn't change anything. But yeah, I think it's good to prepare and just be like, this is kind of what it is,
Yeah. So you mentioned that you started on TikTok, you moved to Instagram, then you moved to YouTube, and mostly doing shorts. Is that sort of the main?
Yes. I am starting to dabble into long form content, which I'm excited about. But yeah, YouTube, oh my gosh, like when I first started posting long form videos, that was another thing. Long form YouTube videos take more hours. They take 6-7 hours to put together. It's a lot. So we're moving on different mediums. And then, I started my business where I host group tours and I do travel consultations and I write ebooks and things like that. And that takes a lot of time out of my day too, which again, it wouldn't change anything because it's all because of social media, but yeah.
Are you able to monetize the travel tours, the ebooks, but are you also able to monetize just like the fact that you have a following on TikTok, on Instagram, and YouTube Shorts? Like, is that something that's monetizable?
Yes, it is. I will say though that I am very picky with the brand collaborations I do. I don't do them often, and who I do them with, they're brands that I've worked with for a year, 2 years. When I first started all of this, I said I made a promise to myself that I would never just do something for a paycheck, right? And I never want to just do something for a paycheck. I'm not going to promote something if I don't use it or agree with it, or if I don't think it's going to be beneficial for my audience. I won't do that. So yes, I'm able to monetize it. I think maybe other influencers maybe monetize it a little bit more than I do. But that's also why I wanted to create my business, because I wanted to have something tangible that I was proud of, that was my own, that was monetizing because I made it that way,
Right. So from a monetization standpoint, it's brand collaborations, but very selectively. But also like YouTube, for example, I know pays creators based on views and other things. Is that part of the mix for you?
Yeah, YouTube pays really well. I say really well in the sense of in the grand scheme of all the social media platforms, it pays the best, which still isn't so much, but it is monetizable. Instagram doesn't pay me. When you create content, you have to post it with the knowledge that for the first couple of months, the first year, the first 2 years, you're probably not going to make any money. But I think that's also the beautiful part of it, right? Because you're creating it because you love it. And then when it becomes monetizable, that's where it gets exciting. And that's where the change happens. But yeah, for the first couple months, it's probably not going to be, and that's okay. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you've created this other business that is complementary to what you're doing in terms of the content, but different. It's not, it is a different way to earn money from what you're passionate about. Right.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about, you do these tours? Can you talk about your favorite experience with regard to the tours?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. I'm actually leaving to go on my first one of this year tomorrow. I think my most memorable moment was my first group trip. Like, it's the classic saying, like, you never forget your first.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a great group of people. All of my tours have been wonderful people, but that first group, they were so kind and patient with me because they understood, they were part of my audience, they were part of my community, and I'm very lucky that the community that we have on this small little corner of the internet is so supportive. But they came and they were understanding that not everything was going to go perfect, and this was my first go, and they were so, just so wonderfully supportive and so patient and kind. And we still have a group chat going, a year later, which is really, really cool. And it was one of my favorite memories because it was one of those things where I was so nervous to do these group tours. I was so nervous because I wanted people to have a good time, and I wanted them to experience Italy like I do. And it's a lot. Yeah. And I remember at the end of that tour, everybody was in the lobby of the hotel and they were hugging each other, and like there was tears. Everybody was so sad to say goodbye. And I remember just looking at all of them, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is what I want to do. Like this is why I do it. And it was wonderful. It was one of my favorite memories.
I love that. I mean, it just kind of goes to why you're doing this. It's so interesting that you started as a dancer.
Yeah.
And and that, I'm sure you had an enormous amount of passion for dancing.
Yeah. I did. I do. I love dancing, but I had done it for my entire life. I was a competitive dancer from the time I was 3. I started doing musicals when I was in middle school, so that's high school. And then I went to university for dance as well. And I love to perform. But I think I had gotten to a point because the industry is a hard one. It's a lot of rejection. It's a lot of toxicity, I think. And if I dare say so. And when I got to a point during the pandemic, because everything had shut down, when I couldn't do it anymore, it was kind of like a wake-up call, if you will. Because I was seeing all my friends, they were posting, gosh, I can't wait to get back into class in the audition room, and they're taking online dance classes. And I was like, I have no desire to do that. And that was a moment I was like, oh, I should probably listen to what that's telling me. And I think I've gotten to the point where I hated the industry so much that I started to hate dance, and I don't want to hate dance. Yeah. So I think it was a good time for me to step back and heal that relationship a little bit.
Yeah. It sounds like you are someone who feels very strongly about kind of being true, listening to yourself and being true to kind of what works for you, that self-awareness. Do you have any advice for people? Because we talk to a lot of women, mostly women are our listeners, and they tell us that they really do struggle with self-awareness. Kind of, they know that maybe they're unhappy with something, but they are not sure what it is, or more importantly, they're not sure how to shift it. Do you have any thoughts or advice for how maybe women can get in touch with what's going on with them?
Yeah. I think your gut is a very intuitive being, and I think it tells you a lot more than you think it does. Also, the thing that kind of hit me and what made me shift my mindset a lot was when I want to do something, I think about the fact that my time on this planet has an expiration date. So does yours. So does everybody's. And when I think of doing something scary, or when I'm scared to do something, I think about being on my deathbed and regretting not doing that thing just because I was too scared. Like that to me is way more scarier than actually doing the scary thing. Right. And so it's listening to your gut, but also just recognizing that like we have to take advantage of life. We only get one. And at the end of it, we don't get a do-over. And so we have to take advantage of the life we have here. And if you're unhappy, you don't get a second chance. So you got to do the shit that scares you,
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that is great advice. And it's interesting too, to kind of project forward and think, what would my 90-something-year-old self say about me today not doing that thing?
There's just something about like looking yourself in the mirror and being able to say, I've done it. I've done everything that I wanted to do. I don't have any secret dream that's lurking in the back of my mind. I've done it. And there's something so powerful about that. And I think we're also capable of that, especially as women. As women, we're constantly told everything about how we should be, how we should look, how we should act, what we're supposed to do, quote unquote. And, you know, I think a lot of the times we maybe put ourselves on the back burner and our dreams and our wants. And I think that we're just so much more capable than we think we are. I think, you know, it's just about trusting ourselves. And that's kind of what it boils down to. Like, you have to trust yourself because you are so much more capable than you think.
Yeah, I love that. You know, to the other thing, I think is that as you take a chance on something or as you do something you're scared to do and it actually turns out okay, it becomes like an experience that you can then draw from moving forward. And that's a really important thing to have those experiences so that you can say down the road when there's another scary thing, let's say, hey, I have some experience doing something scary and it was okay.
Exactly. And I also would argue to say that if you do the scary thing and it doesn't work out, it's still not a failure. Like, you've done it. You had the courage to try. And the fact that you had courage, that will never be a failure, ever.
Yeah.
You know? And so even if it doesn't work out, at least you know, and at least you're not going to be on your deathbed regretting it.
Oh my, I love that. Well, and the mindset, that mindset that you just talked about, which is that basically failure isn't fatal. In fact, and not only is it not fatal, the fact that you had the courage to do it should make you feel like it was almost like a success because you were able to make it happen.
Some of my biggest successes have come from my biggest failures, truly. And I recognize the irony in that. And I think if we shift our mindset to see that, like, when we fail, it's not a failure, because we will always walk away with a lesson learned. And that is never a failure, because you pocket it and you take it to the next journey, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, like, when you really think about it, we only learn from our failures, right? Like, we learn because we mess up and we learn not to do it anymore. Like, oh my gosh, part of the reason why I think my content like grew and why I was able to, you know, I have this wonderful community is because I started sharing all of my travel failures and being like, don't do this. And it you know, it helps other people from making the same mistake, quote unquote. But I think if we can just reshift our mind to say that, you know, it's never a failure if we can learn something from it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's an important way to think about things, because life is going to be full of things that don't go exactly as we plan. And that might be actually great that it didn't go, because where it could go is well beyond what you thought.
There's a quote that says, the minute you start to plan something, the universe laughs. And it really is just like, if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be living in Italy as a content creator, like, I would have thought you were insane. Like, you know, and I think it's just kind of about being open to wherever, you know, the universe has in store for you, because they have so much in store for you. It's just about believing in yourself that you're capable of doing it and saying yes. And that's kind of the hardest part, is saying yes. But we deserve to say yes. We're capable of saying yes. And we deserve all of those good things.
Yeah.
You know?
So I want to ask you about another part of being a creator, which we hear about from a lot of other, especially female creators, because that's, you know, who we're talking with. And many of them talk about how you have to start to develop a thick skin, because comments, things that people say can be very brutal, because, you know, everyone who has, you know, a phone or whatever can kind of type in something that may not be very nice. Yeah. So you have to learn to develop that thick skin. And as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if your experience as a dancer and a performer, because there is so much rejection and it can be very difficult to not internalize that, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you deal with that? I mean, do you get negative? I mean, do you
have? Oh my gosh, yes. Commenting, messaging, emailing. I've gotten, it's brutal. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not. It can be horrific, honestly, very, very horrific. And it can be really hard. You hear about online trolls, but you don't really understand the depth of it until you're in it and you're on the other side of it, truly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I heard, hate comments, blah, blah, blah. And it's so easy to be like, well, they're fine. They can just brush it off, until you get to the other side and you're the one receiving them. God, I probably get hundreds a day. Absolutely.
Wow.
Every content creator I know, every influencer I know, everybody gets them. And it's one of those things. Yes, what you're saying about being a dancer, I think it helped me develop a thick skin in a lot of ways, because my job was to literally go into a room and be judged willingly.
Right.
I think it helped me, get that thick skin. But I also think that there's a difference. That was, just the casting team's, eyes. This is millions of eyes. And there's no guidebook for what to do when all of a sudden you have a million eyes on you, and, you don't really, there's just no guidebook on it. And so the first time I went really viral, I cried every day for a week, like hands down. And it's one of those things when you're content creating, is you kind of get to a point where you have two paths, especially when these online comments start to translate into real life. I've had it happen to me in real life as well, unfortunately. And you kind of get to this point where you see two paths ahead of you, and it's either, okay, I can let this take me down. I can listen to these people that don't know me from, jack shit, sorry to swear, but people don't know me. I can let them take me down, or I can take the higher road, wish them well, and move on. Because I think at the end of the day, when you really think about it, if somebody is going to actively choose to put negativity out into the world, to take time out of their day to write a nasty comment online, it is 1000%. I don't even have a doubt. It is 1000%, because there is something going on in their life that makes them feel the need to do that. Right. And when you think about it like that,
right,
I feel a lot of pity for them. And it's, you wish them well, send them the love that they clearly need, and you move on. And that's all you can really do,
So, Kacie, this is the second time in this conversation that I have jotted down the word mindset. And and I really think there is a lot of this idea of how you think about things that is probably distinguishing you in terms of what you do and why you can be successful doing it. It's interesting that you said that when you think about what must be going on in their lives, whoever's commenting negatively, and you actually feel for them, that is beyond just saying, well, I think about what's going on in their lives, and obviously it's about them, it's not about me, so you whatever, but you actually feel empathy for them.
I think you need to have empathy. I think in general in the world, not even content creators, I think we do need a lot more empathy, because you never know what somebody else is going through,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that female creators and influencers get a special brand of nastiness that maybe male influencers don't get?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. It's like, I don't know if you saw the Barbie movie, but it really is like the Barbie movie where, women in society in general, as women, not even content creators, but as women, we are constantly told an ever-changing criteria of what it is to be perfect, and no matter what, it is always a double-edged sword. You're too skinny, then you're too fat. You're too curvy, then you need to get a butt. You are, you're bossy instead of determined. Like, there's so many double narratives that happen for women that do not happen for men. And I think the same thing goes for online, especially online now, because social media, it's a beautiful tool. I think it gets a lot of bad rep. It's a beautiful, beautiful tool that allows us to connect with other humans around the world, right? But, it also, on the negative side, it's a lot of comparison, which then brings a lot of hate, because we're all so beautifully unique, but it's hard to, you see one person has this preference, and then they tell you that you don't have it. And then this other person, you have that. And then it's a constant changing narrative. And it's hard, I think, for women. I think it's always been harder for women. And I say that with no disrespect to male creators, because there's their own set of obstacles that I'm sure that they have. I don't know anything about them because I identify as a female, but I think, I think that brings it right back to empathy, that we have to have a little bit more empathy, because we don't know what anybody else is going through, especially as women, Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the thing that always I'm astonished by in this industry, in the influencer industry, is that it's so female dominated. I mean,
Mm.
like, what is it? I saw some stat that like 86% of influencers, creators are female or
Yeah.
identify as female. So the fact that it's so female dominated and
Mhm.
there's still this, I don't know, misogyny, like, I don't know what, like, it's still crazy to me that this is going on in an industry that's dominated by women.
But you know what's so interesting? And I talked to my good friend Danae, my good friend Danae Mercer, who's also a influencer. He and I talked about this a lot, and it's very interesting because I think yes, it's female dominated, but unfortunately, as women, we grew up in a misogynistic world, right? And so we inherently have some misogyny with us. Like it's not anything that we're conscious of, but it's one of those things that we have to kind of catch ourselves and unlearn what we have been taught. And a lot of the hate comments do come from women, and that
Oh,
sucks. It
interesting.
sucks. A lot of it comes from men as well, and
Mhm.
but it's interesting, and it's an unfortunate part that there is women supporting women, but there is a lot of also internalized misogyny that goes
Yeah.
on within women as well, and it
That's a
makes
really interesting point because that women have kind of internalized misogyny just because of the environment we live in. And because I've
yeah,
heard from a lot of female creators and influencers that a lot of the negativity comes from other women in their
mhm,
commenting. And
yeah,
I find it a little bit surprising. But
yeah.
when you say that maybe as women we've internalized misogyny.
I think so. And it's again, it's not to say that we're not sitting here being like, I'm going to be misogynist. It's not any of that, but it's just like we live in a misogynistic world. We do. We
Mhm,
live in the patriarchy. And
mhm.
so everything from, when we're old enough to start gathering different pieces of information about how the world works, even things that nonverbal that we see with our own eyes, like there's so many small things that kind of fuel this misogynistic little trait in us. And I'm not calling every woman misogynistic, but
Right.
we all have a lot of things that we need to unlearn. And it's an
Mhm.
active, constant active process to do so. But I think it's important to remember that in that like we are all in the same boat. And like if we work together and we support each other, we can help each other through that.
I love that. It sounds like you've also built a community of sort of, maybe when I say community, I don't mean like a gazillion people like your follower, like the followers that you have. I mean like just sort of like almost like an executive board, like like, and you mentioned another influencer, a female creator that you're friendly with. Is there value in that for you? That sort of feminine, that female support with women who are cheering you on, and is that something you've been able to create with other influencers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's
Mm.
important to do that. Even just speaking of Danae, I have so much respect for her. And Danae also, she lives in Florence with her now husband, but we met, I think I had been doing content creation at that point for like 5, 6 months, maybe. And I was going through a phase of just like these online hate comments were really starting to get to me. And it was a world that I had found myself in that I had no idea how to navigate. Again,
Mhm.
there is no guidebook, and you're just, it's very lonely. It's a very lonely thing. It's a beautiful thing, but it's lonely. And she was kind of the first one that I was able to talk to that had been through it and knew.
Mhm.
And so she kind of held my hand through a lot of it. And she gave me a lot of advice when I needed it. And I have a lot of
Mhm.
respect for her because she did it without judging. She took my hand and she said, I got you. And it was so beautiful. And since then I've also, have other influencer friends and non-influencer friends, of course. But I think in the same way that when you have a job, you have your coworkers. Other influencers in this job are your coworkers in
Yes.
that. And so it's important to
Mhm.
have somebody that understands your job
Mhm.
and knows
Mhm.
exactly like what you're going through in the same way any job. And so there's a lot of beauty in that. Yeah.
So my last question for you,
Yeah.
you've had this experience now living in Italy.
Yeah.
How has your understanding of Italy changed?
Oh my gosh. I think the thing that I love is that I appreciate that I always see the beauty. Like it's such a beautiful country to me. I also love though that, living here, it's very different living somewhere than being a tourist somewhere, right?
Mhm.
And I appreciate now that living here, I see both the good and the bad. There are
Yeah.
things that I don't like about Italy, just like there's things about, the US that Dario did. There's no perfect utopia out there. And it's important to remember that. And Italy is not perfect. And it's beautiful, but there are things I don't like. And I kind of love that there are things that I don't like, because to me, when I learn about those things, it maybe almost like proves that I love it more, I guess. Like for me, it shows how much I really do love it, because I recognize the imperfections and I'm choosing to continue to love it anyway.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that.
Well, and it's a realization too that there's so many different parts and they can all together be beautiful without having every single piece of it feel beautiful,
Yes,
right?
not everything is going to feel beautiful. Not everything is, but there are, I think it's about recognizing the not so great moments, but also the fact that it doesn't take away that it doesn't mean that you can't love it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if people want to follow you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, on TikTok, I am at Kacie Rose 4. On Instagram, it's at Kacie Rose _. YouTube is at Kacie Rose, but you can always head to my website, which is KacieRoseTravel.com.
Thank you so much, Kacie, for spending this time with us. I so enjoyed this conversation, took tons of notes, which is always a great sign. So I appreciate it. And I continue to see the great stuff that you're doing. So congratulations on everything. Thank you for listening. If you're an influencer or a brand that wants to work with us, please feel free to email us at info@shespeaks.com. Until next time.